Revelation that's kind of fair because that was a later
Kind
edition
of
of the New
fair. You
Testament.
guys hear? This is the fruit of Protestantism. That's kind of fair to get Revelation out of the canon. So then why is it in your canon?
Sola Scriptura, but also I'm kind of questioning that, so I'm not sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so why do you think Sola Scriptura
That's
is
that's
false?
that's an example. What happens when you get high on your life? Well, what do I
Yeah,
think? What, not you. I'm talking to anybody.
I know.
Sola
Why do you think it's
Scriptura is
false?
to have a sola scriptura. You have to know what the scriptura is. So, what is the scriptura?
Uh, the 66 books.
And where'd you get that from? From the scriptures? Where did it say 66?
No, well, it's through tradition.
So then you just buried sola scriptura.
No, because church tradition isn't
Are you
infallible.
debating me? Yes, you did. Because if you trust the tradition that tells you the exact list of books, then why don't you trust the tradition tell you what it means?
Well, I don't think the tradition's infallible. I think sometimes they're
And so
right,
how do you
sometimes they're
know they're
wrong.
infallible in giving you 60 books? See, now you're burying yourself, you see? So how do you know they
No,
were not?
you don't have to be infallible to choose the books.
That's not my question. If it's not infallible, then that means you may have wrong books in your canon. So prove to me that none of the books you have are
Well,
mistaken.
because via consensus for many, many years, and the Jews believe
I
it.
mean, the
So it's like
consensus that also accepted the Deuterocanonicals, and which Jewish group are you appealing to because you're going to bury yourself?
the Hebrews of
No,
Martin
because at
Luther's
the time
time.
of Christ, their Jews had different canons. The Pharisees, we don't even know the exact number of books they had because you're dependent on later rabbinic tradition tells you whatever they had earlier on. But then you have the Dead Sea Scrolls. They had Sirach, Tobit, Letter of Jeremiah. Is that in your 66 books?
No.
So don't be smart, Alecky. Understand my objection because you're burying yourself, but you're not listening. So I'm going to ask you again. If the church that gave you your 66, which is a lie, gave you more than that, what's 66? If it's fallible, convince me, agnostic, that you don't have a wrong book in it because modern scholarship says you have forgeries in your New Testament.
Like what?
First, Second, Timothy, and Titus. Consensus of biblical scholarship that Paul did not write it. Now, convince me, because I don't want your church. Your church can be fallible like you. Those are not forgeries, and they should be in there.
Well, I don't know if. And I
Exactly.
haven't really looked into them being forgeries. I don't
Yeah,
think they
because
are.
you're parroting what your Protestant apologists tell you. Another thing, even in the early church, Second Peter was disputed because some people thought that Peter did not write Second Peter. You now have your Protestant scholars, and I'll give you names, Michael Bird and Richard Bauckham. These are Protestant scholars, apologists, say Peter did not write Second Peter. Why the hell do you have a forgery in your New Testament?
Well, I believe we don't.
I
So
don't care
know.
what you believe. You're not God. You're not a prophet. Don't give me your subjective opinion. Convince me. I'm agnostic. I'm Bart Ehrman. Convince
Well,
me.
I don't. I didn't think it was. I've never heard that before.
Because you are living in an echo chamber. You're just listening to your own apologists. Get out there, do some real evangelism with Muslims, agnostic, atheist, and Orthodox and Catholic, and you're going to hear a lot that you haven't heard. And it's not just the Catholic objection or an Orthodox objection. The Protestants are now calling into question your canon. There are Protestant scholars, Michael Bird and T. Wright, I have their books, Richard Bauckham, as Protestant conservatives say, Peter did not write Second Peter. And whether you believe Paul wrote the pastoral epistles or someone came after Paul and wrote it, that's fine. What do you mean it's fine? First and Second Timothy and Titus say Paul wrote it. So is it wrong?
I don't think so.
But I don't care what you think. Prove that your scholars are wrong in saying maybe Paul didn't write it. Maybe someone came after and a Pauline group wrote it in the memory of Paul, but they said Paul wrote it. Yeah, but
Well,
that was acceptable.
It could be historically significant, but maybe not theologically. I mean, we could still include it
Yeah,
if it's historically.
you're a brain ass. So you're saying it's not theologically significant that God includes a forgery attributed to someone who didn't write it, and that doesn't have no theological implications.
Well, I think
Yeah,
not everything in Scripture needs to have theological significance. I don't think.
let me repeat it again. It has theological significance when you tell me there are forgeries in your canon, because First, Second Timothy, and Titus state Paul wrote them. You're telling me it is historically significant, but not theologically significant, because this impacts God and his ability to work through the church to make sure he gives us books that are not falsely attributed to people who didn't write them. Yes, it is theologically significant because that means God was passive in who canonize the books. Where was God in that process to ensure that these people did not introduce forgeries?
Well,
Yeah,
I
well,
think through divine revelation.
what
Martin Luther.
divine revelation? What are you talking about? So you're saying the early church received revelation, so that means their canonization must be infallible if it was inspired. You just told me they're not. You said it's fallible. So that means they didn't receive divine revelation. So make up your mind. Because if they received divine revelation, you just buried your argument. That means that church is infallible.
I mean, it's Martin Luther in his work, what his main goal
We're
was
not talking about Martin
he
Luther.
was,
He's a Johnny come lately. Martin Luther also wanted to get James out of his Bible and Revelation and Hebrews.
well, Revelation that's kind of fair because that was a later edition.
Kind of fair. You guys hear? This is the fruit of Protestantism. That's kind of fair to get Revelation out of the canon. So then why is it in your canon?
Well, I guess they thought it was okay. I mean, I don't really have a perspective.
Who's
I don't
they
really have
thought? The same people you just said, they are not necessarily right, not only in the canon, because they're not infallible, but even interpretation of the canon?
Well, I think
John,
the Old Testament was.
Why don't you get out of here, John? Because you're embarrassing yourself. Just go. I'm saying nice to you. No, I'm being honest. Because you said the Old Testament, you didn't hear me. The groups at the time of Christ were not unanimous about the listing of the books of the Old Testament. Do you go with the Sadducees, only accept 5 books?
No.
Do you go with the Samaritans, only accept 5 books?
No.
What about the Essenes, or the people who produced the Dead Sea Scrolls? Their canon, it was larger than yours. Sirach, letter of Jeremiah, and Tobit, they included that in their canon. They didn't have Esther. So why don't you have Sirach and Tobit, letter of Jeremiah, and why do you have Esther? And even after the time of Christ, there were rabbis who even disputed the canonicity of Esther, and some of them accepted the inspiration of Sirach. So which Jews are you appealing to? Because they were not unanimous.
The Jews of
John,
the time of
I
Martin
think
Luther.
your mom's calling you. I just gave you the time of Christ. So were you born, honestly, John, honestly, were you born stupid, or did you become stupid in time? Because I just said the Jews at times of Christ. Sadducees, was that at the time of Moses? Samaritans, was that the time of Moses? The Dead Sea Scrolls, time of Moses? These are people contemporary with Christ. John, go. The Baptist is calling you, the altar call. Go, brother.
All right.
Okay, buddy.